So today's game is game 1 from a 7-round over-the-board rapid play tournament I played in recently. So the section I entered was the intermediate tournament with an ECF rating cap of 1600. I was the third seed of around 50 players with an ECF rapid rating in the high 1500s. Now, if you follow the channel, you may know that online I've been over 2000 rapid on chess.com for quite some time, so there is a bit of a rating gap there. Now, my view is that online ratings and over the board ratings do not translate perfectly, and in my case a lot of my improvement happened during the COVID period when I was playing far more online than over the board, so my ECF rating is still catching up. Now, that made this tournament interesting for me. It wasn't just about trying to win games, it was a test of whether the chess I believe I'm capable of online would actually hold up in a real tournament setting with a clock, physical pieces, nerves, and no engine telling me afterwards what I should have done. So across this series, I'm going to take you through all 7 games. I'll show you what I was thinking during the game, what actually happened, and then we'll check the critical moments with the engine afterwards. Now, the question for game 1 was simple. Can I settle into the tournament? Can I avoid doing anything careless and start building some momentum? So I started game 1 with the white pieces. I went for e4, c6. Now, if you see my video in the exploitative opening repertoire, you'll know that in the Caro-Kann, I like to play the advanced variation with the intention of meeting bishop f5 with the tile variation of h4. Now, I'll put a link in the description below to that video. What I didn't talk about in that series, was what I like to do against the Botvinnik-Karls variation when black plays the immediate c5. So I'm really glad this actually came up in this game, so I've got now a chance to kind of talk about this. The idea is simply to take on the challenge, take this kind of available pawn right now, and the way I've liked to play this in the past is just to try and hold on to it if black doesn't play very precisely against this. So we'll get an idea of how I do this now. So d takes c5. Now I play this structure from black when I'm playing the Caro-Kann, and my approach is to play the immediate e6 and get that pawn back as quickly as possible. And when you see how this game starts to pan out, you're going to see why I like to do that with black. Now, if you ever try this with white online, it's a really interesting thing that seems to happen is that black almost always blitzes out the move knight c6. We play knight f3. Their intention is to simply attack one of the pawns. They want to win one of these pawns back. We play knight f3, defending that pawn. They blitz out the move bishop g4, trying to remove one of our defenders by pinning it. We play bishop b5, pinning their attacker. And you notice all these moves are revolving around this e5 pawn, this key pawn that they want to win back. Now, this is the point where everyone seems to blitz out the move e6. It's like saying, I've accepted the fact that I'm not going to win this pawn back, and now I'm going to move my attention onto this pawn. And they usually blitz out the moves to this point, and then you play the move b4, and then suddenly their time starts ticking down, and they suddenly come to this realization that they might not be getting this pawn back after all. I think if you are going to play this way with black, really, instead of e6, this is your last chance to play the move queen a5, and after knight c3, e6. The point is here that by bringing the queen out, you're not allowing this move b4. This is their last chance really to make sure they get one of these pawns back. But anyway, in reality, everybody plays e6 here. We played b4, and then my opponent's time started ticking down quite a lot here. Now, one of the reasons I believe that this way of playing against the Botvinnik-Karls structure is very effective is because I've talked a lot in the past about red flags, like how do we deal with red flags against us? But you look at this from the opponent's perspective, there are 2 red flags for my opponent here. There are 2 different pawns in their half of the board. And that's why, practically, trying to hold on to both of these can be really effective. There's this general pattern I've kind of noticed in my own games, that the more red flags that exist in a position, the more things start to get out of control. So my opponent here, she switched her attention back to the pawn on e5 with queen to c7. So attacking that pawn and saying, well, it's not defended because this knight is pinned. I think a really important move here, which I really like to insert, is knight b to d2. It's understanding that this is one of the key imbalances in the position. I've got this pawn in the enemy half of the board, and it's not supported by a pawn of my own yet, so this is really a vulnerable thing. If I can hold on to this, my opponent's life is going to be really tough. And I always want to be able to, therefore, recapture here with the knight and just hold on to this with pieces. In fact, if I go back and move for black, I think, in my experience, a really a move you might see from black, if they're really knowledgeable and they're really understanding what's happening here, is to take the knight immediately before we have the opportunity to capture with another knight, and then start applying some pressure to e5. In my experience, that might be a bit more successful for black. But anyway, they did the very natural human thing. They didn't just want to give up their bishop for a knight. I took the opportunity to back it up with a knight of my own. And she played bishop e7, kind of not really knowing how to approach the situation anymore. It's kind of like she's now missed the chance. These pawns are here to stay. And I'm a pawn up. I've got 2 pawns in the enemy half of the board. This is looking really desperate for black now. I kicked the bishop away. I'm always happy to recapture on f3 with the knight. She dropped the bishop back, which is a bit unusual. I wasn't really sure how to respond to this, so I just carried on very naturally. I don't have to do anything crazy here because I am just up a pawn, and it's not like black has any real compensation for it. They're not able to easily trade off loads of pieces to compensate for this lack of space they have, and they don't have any easy ways to break down these pawn chains that I have. So I just castled, and after knight h6 is the only way the knight can actually develop. I wasn't quite sure how to approach this, so I now really want to secure this pawn chain on the queen side. In the past I've played moves like c3, a3 to secure things like that. I've also played bishop b2 to secure this pawn. So it's all about trying to secure both of these pawns and just letting the game naturally play out from there. One thing I've kind of learned about this structure since playing this game is actually c3 to kind of hold this structure together can be really good. And in the longer term, understanding that we have this 3 versus 2 pawn majority on the queen side, and actually with that in mind, thinking about moves like a4 to eventually play b5 and c6 and create a pass pawn on the queen side. So using that a pawn a little bit more aggressively. In this game I went for bishop b2. I thought it's always nice to just get this bishop off the back rank, connect to these back rank pieces. I'm adding more defense to this pawn. Wasn't 100% sure this was the right way to do it, but it's what I went for. Castles, and this is always the moment, a kind of subtlety in this opening. As soon as this pin disappears on this knight, they're renewing their pressure on e5, which is one of our key pawns. We want to keep that in the opponent's half of the board, so this is the moment to take it. She recaptured with the queen, and I think I went a little bit wrong here with rook e1 in hindsight. It felt very natural at the time because I'm just adding more support to that key pawn. However, I think having this pawn in the enemy half of the board is very much like a French defense type structure, and a very common thing that black might try here eventually is the move f6. Saying, well, I can't attack the base of this pawn chain, I'm going to attack it head on eventually. And once that move happens, and let's say these 2 pawns get traded at some point, black's rook on the f-file becomes quite good. And I'd very much prefer in that case to have this rook on that f-file as well, kind of supporting that vulnerable f2 square. So a little bit of a subtlety, something I might have done differently next time. And in fact, my opponent did play f6 immediately. And I think it was here it started to occur to me that I might have regretted moving this rook. And I looked at a few lines here, but one thing that came to mind was that after the very simple forcing of the queen trade with knight d4, I didn't necessarily think this was the best move in the position, but I still thought I was enough better that this should lead to a relatively simple kind of conversion in the long term. So I thought the simple and good enough approach was my preference here, especially in a rapid game where you don't have a huge amount of time on the clock. So I did actually go for knight d4 here. So she took the queen, I took the queen, b takes, rook a takes d1. I've centralised both my rooks here. And I think long term, I just have a really simple plan here. I can secure this pawn structure with c3 on the queen side if I want to, but long term I can play moves like a4, b5, and after takes, I'm going to get like this protected pass pawn on the c-file. And long term, that's going to be my game plan. That's how I'm going to win this game. And in the short term, I'm still up a pawn. So I just want to look for nice opportunities to trade pieces and just slowly convert into that winning end game. I think my opponent made a big mistake here, releasing the pressure against e5, and she played f5. I think her only chance was maybe to build up pressure against that point. I think maybe it's too late for her anyway, and that there's no clear way to do it. I think stuff like this, I've always got f4 at the very least if I have to, but I've also got knight coming in here. I've still got this bishop defending it. I've got this rook defending it. I don't think anything's really going to happen. I think when these pawns get traded, if they get traded, eventually all she's going to be left with is this weak pawn on e6. So I wasn't really concerned about it anyway, but I think f5 now, I've got absolutely nothing to worry about. And it seemed to me here that if I can get my knight to d4, because this is a very close position now, so it's less about time and more about just getting your pieces to really optimal squares, and you've got the time to do it. So it just seemed to me that a knight on d4 was going to be really powerful, so I just started that maneuver. I wanted to optimize my pieces first, and maybe in the long term I'll go for this queenside kind of pawn pushing thing where I'm going to try to get a pass pawn. Rook a to b8, a3. I don't love this move in hindsight. At the time, my kind of thinking was, yeah, I'm just going to play both of these pawn moves. Well, okay, my thinking at the time was, which of these pawn moves do I actually prefer? And it seemed to me I preferred moving the a pawn, because moving the c pawn would have blocked in my bishop's view of e5. However, I don't think it was necessary to keep that bishop's view of e5. First of all, that pawn on e5 is under zero pressure. And second of all, it's completely over-defended. So there's nothing really to worry about there. I think the reason c3 is probably better here, and I haven't checked this with the computer yet, but the reason I think c3 is probably better in hindsight is because it leaves this option to play a4 and b5 later and get this pass pawn on the queen side. So I don't think a3 is the right square for that pawn in hindsight. Also, I'll go back to this point actually. Every time I play this opening online, every time I put a bishop on b2, the one thing I'm saying to myself is do not blunder this pawn on c5, because in so many of my games, a heavy piece for black has got to the b file. They've sacked the bishop here, you capture back and you lose your bishop on b2. I've made that blunder so many times. For some reason, it's a complete blind spot for me. So I was saying to myself in this game early on, don't make that blunder. And when we get back to this point, I'd completely forgotten about it. So that's another reason I don't think a3 was the right move. I just completely forgotten about it, even though I'd been saying it to myself earlier in the game. And it's quite surprising to me that when you're in that kind of pressure over the board, how these things kind of happen. You kind of forget things. She did go for this, but fortunately for me, because that was a mistake to allow that. Fortunately for me, my position is so good here, I can get away with this. I still felt that kind of trading pieces here, even though I'm not a pawn up anymore, as soon as I can get that knight to d4, I felt my position was going to be amazing. She did take the bishop, which I didn't love. And after a take back, I was very confident here. Yes, I blundered that pawn. I was annoyed at myself for doing it, but I still think my position is winning here. She defended the pawn on e6, and I think that was a good decision, because my thinking here is that even though this pawn on c6 is hanging, after rook c8 and I've got this weak pawn on c2 and this knight pinned to it, it didn't make me feel very comfortable. I'd probably have to bring the knight back then. It's probably fine, but in the long term I was worried that this was allowing unnecessary counterplay. Just one more thing to think about, which when you've got limited time on the clock, you really don't want to be doing. So I thought I've got all the time in the world here to do a little bit better than that. I thought I'm first of all going to get the rook behind here. I'm going to play c4 eventually, remove this potential weakness I have, this backwards pawn on a future open file, and then I'll go for the other stuff. She took this opportunity to defend the c pawn. Why not? I broke with c4. And my idea here is if this file opens up, this is going to be a weakness of black, and eventually I'll try and win that pawn. Knight f7, bringing the knight back in. I played f4 here. Didn't really know if this was necessary to add more defense to this, but I thought my position is so good here that I've got the luxury of playing really solid. I've got the luxury of kind of taking time to just make sure there's zero counterplay, there's zero stuff to think about. My opponent played g6, very hard to find moves for at this point. I played rook e3. My plan is just double up on that c file before I actually open it up. Knight back to d8. Kind of, I understand the idea here. It's defending both of these pawns, but it's so passive. It's just like, it's a matter of time until I break through here and win the game. Now I took, and after doubling up a knight e6, I think my opponent's idea here was to kind of tempt me into trading the knights, which I did, and saying, well, now I've got 2 defenders on here. But what she possibly missed, or was hoping I didn't notice, was the move b5 at the end of it, and now this really is just game over. I am going to get a pass pawn on the queen side. So my opponent played on here, one of these younger players that's like, yeah, you just never resign, just see what happens. So fair enough. c5, take, so I've won this pawn back, d4, and I decided now was the time to bring the king in. I'd rather just leave this active rook here, kind of defending all of this, and just take the opportunity now to try and bring the king in slowly. There's absolutely no rush for me here. As long as I win that d pawn from black, like, the game is won. So I brought the king in slowly. Nothing too interesting here. Decided to take with the rook. I mean, it doesn't really matter at this point. You can take it any way you want. Played it safe, defend that pawn first, rook b6, take it with the king. The rook can't come in to give me any checks here. Threw in this check, hoping that, well, the idea here is simply I'm either driving the king back to the 8th rank, or they're going to defend with the rook and I get to trade another piece and go into an easily won endgame. She did defend with the rook, traded this, and now it's just a matter of time. I'm just going to invade slowly and win the game. I even threw in h4 just to make sure I stop this move. No need to do it, completely unnecessary, but you know, it kind of just gives you that comfort in when you're in a tournament game, you're feeling the stress and you just want to make sure that they can't play anything. You're completely freezing them out of the game. a5 here, trying to make a pass pawn on the queen side. King c7. I push the other pawn, a deflection idea. She's got to decide, am I heading to this side? Am I heading to this side? You can't cover both. King d8. King up. No rush to make that pass pawn. Bring the king up first. And eventually make the pass pawn. Push the other one. Again, she can't catch both. Make the queen, and then a few moves later, we get our checkmate. So I've just ran the computer analysis with the lead chess engine, and we got a 95% accuracy, an 18 average centipawn loss, and one thing that really surprised me was 1 blunder. And at the time of looking at this, I had no idea where this blunder came in. It wasn't clear to me at all. I knew I dropped that pawn on c5 in the middle game, but because of the follow-up was so kind of decisive, it didn't really feel to me like a blunder. It was like something I got away with, but it didn't feel like a blunder. So I was really interested to see where this came in. So let's have a look at some key points the computer's picked out and see if we can try to figure out where we actually went wrong, where we could improve, and let's see if we can find one fundamental takeaway idea we can take into future games. So the first point I want to talk about is actually here after bishop g4. Now, the way I've always played this is with bishop b5, e6 and b4, as we talked about in the game, and then just playing it in a way where you're trying to hold on to both of these pawns. However, I showed this same position to a friend of mine recently, really strong player, rated about 2400 on chess.com. He made me aware of a move which I completely hadn't seen before. A really tactical way to play this opening, and I think this is how I'm going to be playing it in the future. The move bishop e3 here, and it's this idea that the idea of black's last move was to undermine the defender of the e5 pawn so they can take it. And I've been trying this online since this tournament, and it's been really successful. The amount of people who take this pawn thinking that their plan has worked, they've pinned the defender, but you simply take it and throw in this check at the end. And the idea here is that because this is an opening where black has lost their c pawn, a very natural defender of this bishop check, and they also have diverted their bishop, which would be a very natural defender of this check, and they've also lost their knight, which could be a very natural defender of this check. Those three things all coming together are a kind of sign that this tactical opportunity is going to exist. So if you go back a few moves, just with all that in mind, right to here, look, first of all, that c pawn, that's gone. That could block that check in the future. And here, after bishop e3, well, now we've traded that knight off. The bishop's been deflected, and now after this, it's just game over. White's completely winning. They have to give up the queen. So here, take this, and then we're also going to, well, the king has to move. We're going to take this with check, win the rook in the corner. We might win this at some point. That's not necessarily the best follow-up, but you kind of get the idea. White's completely winning here. So that's the way I'm going to try to treat this in the future. Bit of a... And even if they don't fall for that tactic, by the way, still a very good way to play it. There's a bit of theory there, but but whatever. Anyway, in the game, I decided to play it like this, just holding on to the pawn. And the point I want to get to is, yeah, the first thing the computer picks up, which I picked up after the game, was rook e1 here. I don't think it was the right idea. I don't think my opponent's f6 immediately after this was correct, which is what she played, but sooner or later in this type of structure, this kind of French defence type structure, you might expect the move f6 to get played, you might expect this f file to open up, and you might expect some kind of future pressure on f2. So this is a little nuance I missed, and the computer has picked up on this as a mistake. Or as an inaccuracy, should I say. So it wasn't a big deal, but I did spot it after the game. Next point. Okay, so the next thing the computer's picking up again is this a3 move, and I'm assuming the idea is exactly what I said before, that in this structure long term you should be a bit more ambitious and be hoping to eventually be able to play a4 followed by b5 and be creating a passed pawn on the queen side. If you ignore this c pawn for a moment, you're just kind of seeing that you have 3 versus 2 on the queen side, so you've got very good opportunities to create a passed pawn. That should be the way you're trying to win this position. So with that in mind, I thought a3 was an inaccuracy, and the computer agrees with that. Going forward a few more moves. Okay, so we're actually getting to the blunder now. So after g6, the computer wants me to take straight away. And let's turn the engine on for a moment so we can see this. Yeah, and after c takes, I'm assuming the idea is we can exchange the rooks and just win a pawn on e6. Now, if they take the other way, sorry, that's the move I played in the game. If they take back the other way, then we're just winning the pawn on c6. Yeah, we just take it either way. With that in mind, I should just do it immediately. Now, my idea was that I've got all the time in the world, so I can throw in the move rook e3 first, double up on the c file, and then go for the idea. So what I missed in the game was actually c5 apparently. Now, apparently I'm still better here, but I mean, it's really hard to see what's kind of going on here. My instinct would be just to take this, and then after rook takes, I think you can start to see the problem that this rook here is temporarily undefended. And that means that if I can't take this pawn on d5, this is kind of a weakness, and black has blockaded it, and I guess they're going to start to pile up pressure on it sooner or later somehow. Now, I'm still better here, but I've given them counterplay, which I really didn't want to give them. And I think the kind of lesson to learn from that blunder, I mean, you can just look at it and say, well, I just didn't calculate, I missed that really impressive move they had. But I think a better way for me to look at this is that, why are you wasting time with unnecessary build-up when the more direct approach, the immediate capture, if it works, why are you wasting time? And also, another point about that, a red flag, which I'm aware of, but I didn't think about in this moment, was leaving pieces undefended. Yes, in this very moment, this rook is not attacked directly, but it's undefended, therefore it's tactically vulnerable. Similarly, this rook is tactically vulnerable. This knight is tactically vulnerable. None of these pieces are defended right now. So I'm kind of asking for trouble in a sense. So going back, yeah, that was the point. Like, more direct. If it works right now, why are you wasting time? Anyway, I got away with this in the game. My opponent didn't spot that move. I didn't spot that move. And then after, I don't think the computer has any more points to make. No, I think from this point, the computer is happy with the way we played. So it's just that one blunder that was kind of tarnished this otherwise very good game, very nice start to the tournament. So that's one big lesson I'm taking away from this game going into my future tournaments. If something works right now, you don't need to waste time building it up and making it perfect. If it works now, do it now. So that game took us to 1 out of 1. Now, as I said, I was kind of seeded number 3 in this tournament. So in your opening game, you do get a lower rated opponent. But now we're starting to play against other players who have also won games. So the tournament's going to start to get more serious from this point out. So we're on the board. Tune in again tomorrow when we're going to see how game number 2 plays out. See you tomorrow.